Welcome to Awakening Soul Truth. I'm Allison Ledbetter, and this is Robbie Short. And we are both Reiki teachers, meditation teachers, and she is a yogi, and I am a medium. And today we are actually discussing this beautiful, amazing trip that Robbie took to India. She did a pilgrimage. She led a group of people to India. So tell us where you went, because that's significant.
Yes. I'm going to backtrack and say I have been to India before. It was in the 90s as a flight attendant. I've been to New Delhi and Mumbai and Agra were the three cities that I had been to. And, you know, that was a good while back, 20 some years ago. And I've been wanting to do a pilgrimage for years. So Rishikesh was where I led the trip. Rishikesh is one of the most spiritual cities in the world and India, obviously. I knew being in India before. India's culture is so drastically different than our own. And I've led international retreats before, but I just knew that for this one, I needed a guide. I wanted a driver. I did not want to be like on a tour bus. I didn't want to be like on a touristy thing. I wanted it to be a pilgrimage. So I wanted to plan, the temples we would go to, the places that we would go to, the holy sites that we would visit. So Rishikesh is actually said to be the land of the gods.
Okay.
The place of the sages. And home of the senses. So there's like a lot of different things that Rishikesh provides. It's even considered the yoga capital of the world. So there's tons of ashrams there. It's actually become a little bit more, I would say, kind of touristy, even though I wouldn't consider it touristy. There are more tourists going because it's been entitled the yoga capital of the world. So there's a lot of ashrams there where people could come and study yoga. And there's a lot of people that go to get trained how to teach yoga. So there are pockets around Rishikesh that are like that because Rishikesh isn't as populated as those larger cities. Right. In fact, it's not as polluted in Rishikesh because you're at the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. The air is cleaner. Even the upper part of the Ganges River is obviously, cleaner because it's fresh from the snow-capped mountains. So once it goes on into India, it gets filthier.
It's physically very beautiful.
It's a gorgeous place to visit. Very mountainous. Where the Ganges River is, there were actually at one time 3 rivers that connected into this one place where we went to an arti, which is a ritual or ceremony that the priests do at different points along the river every morning at sunrise and every evening at sunset.
Oh, wow.
Like every day. Wow. And large groups of people and locals will come to experience the arti, which is this beautiful ceremony that the priests do with incense and fire. And they have prasad, so it's like a blessing. There's musicians there and people chanting mantras and chanting and singing and celebration. There's beautiful offerings that you can purchase from people before you go down to the arti, which is basically made of big leaves with a lot of marigold flowers and red roses and incense and a candle. And then you place it in the river as an offering, as gratitude, or to make a wish, or to ask for forgiveness. It really can be anything. It's like a prayer.
The candle?
You light the candle, you light the incense, and then as you're going towards the water after the ceremony, the priest will give you something to eat. That's like a food that's been blessed. So anyway, that first day in Rishikesh, going back to the email that I sent everyone. So I warned them that death may be in your face. You may see cremation. I mentioned the fact that cows are considered holy and are free. They're not penned up in a pasture somewhere. They're literally roaming the streets. So the streets, therefore, are not clean because you have a lot of cow poo and pee, and there's a lot of wild dogs, and so all the wild dogs are very friendly though. They'll come up to you, but they don't necessarily beg. Anyway, there's a lot of different things culturally that I was kind of pre-warning people to be aware of that's different, because I wanted to ease them into that transition and to give them kind of a heads up on what to expect. Like the bathrooms, the public bathrooms may not have a toilet. You may have 2 planks and a hole in the ground where you have to squat. And, you know, the nicer bathrooms that have that kind of facility may have a porcelain, it almost looks like a urinal in the ground, but they have a hose that works as a bidet. You know, I mean, it's just different. You know, it's very
radically different.
It is just radically different. And Rishikesh is vegetarian. There's no meat. There's no alcohol in the city.
The whole city?
Yes. Now, I will say,
that's kind of cool.
we did pass a Burger King at some point. Now, like I said, it's not, and it was not in the main Rishikesh area. It was more in it was kind of going up towards where the rafters go down the river, so a little bit farther upstream. Yeah, so I'm like, how is there a Burger King if it's non-meat? But anyway, besides the point. When we got to Rishikesh, we were able to go into a temple. The first temple was dedicated to Vishnu. And, you know, you take your shoes off because the feet are considered unclean. And I think for good reason, because there is a lot of pollution there. There's a lot of trash on the streets. And like I said, there's a lot of waste on the streets. So the shoes are unclean. So you take your shoes off to go into the temple. You ring a bell to let God know I'm here. Come to me. It's like getting their attention.
Nice.
And you can walk around the perimeter once, or I did it 3 times just because I like the number 3. And you always walk clockwise. And then you can go into the temple and you can observe the altar they have there. You bow down to your third eye, and if there's a priest there, they usually put like some kind of bendy paint here on their brow, and they'll give you some prasad, something to eat that's been blessed. And I actually got these as well from different temples as a blessing, and you wear them until they literally fall off.
Nice.
And the second one that I received was at a Shiva temple, and the priest was asking me about my family, if I had a father, if I had a mother, to name my sisters, and all the different braids represented each one. And then he asked me if I had a child, and he made my son one. So I was able to give my son one of these blessing bracelets from India when I returned home. So that first night we went to the river, and we had to walk all through the shopping area, which is wild and crazy. And the traffic is wild and crazy. So 2 lanes, 4 lanes, it doesn't matter. If it's 2 lanes, it turns into 4. If it's 4 lanes, it turns into 8. There's no staying in the lines.
Whoa.
So it's intense. This is why we needed a driver.
Right.
You do not want to rent a car in India unless you already are used to that type of driving. But there's mopeds, there's, tuk-tuks, there's mopeds, there's buses, there's cars, you name it. They're out on the street. Rickshaws, and everybody's trying to make their way, and it's honking after honking after honking after honking.
Oh my gosh.
It's very chaotic order in some weird way.
Yeah.
And I started to tell people, because I had noticed this back in the 90s, I was like, pay attention, because they're not honking to be rude. And they're not honking like a New York City taxi driver would. Right? They're honking because they want you to know where they are. They're bringing your awareness to, hey, I'm on your right. Hey, I'm passing you on your left. Hey, if you're going around these switchbacks on the mountains that have these deep curves, you have to honk because you want the person coming around the bend to know you're coming, and it may be head on. So lots of times when you're looking out the windshield, you're playing chicken, and it's like all of a sudden, woof, and it's intense. It's intense. But something that's really cool, every taxi, the bus that we were in, or van rather, most of the cars have an altar in the car.
Nice.
On their dashboard. So whatever deity they prefer, whether it's Ganesha or Shiva, they're sitting on the dashboard. They usually have like a beautiful garland made out of marigold hanging. So it's like they create this altar with fresh flowers on their dashboard all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just part of their culture. And this is what I'm wanting to share, is that literally in Rishikesh, and I know this is one of the most spiritual cities, but you cannot walk down the street without seeing a beautiful painting or some type of sculpture or statue of a deity, of a saint, of a famous yogi. It's literally everywhere. Everywhere you look, it's like a little reminders everywhere you go. You have those ceremonies at the morning, at the evening, every day at the river. You have people coming from all over India as a pilgrimage to come to these holy sites. And then, of course, you have people like us that know just enough that we want to go and experience it for ourselves. There's temples everywhere, just kind of like in the South where there's churches on every corner, except our churches are often closed.
Okay.
The temples are open.
Like the structure's open?
Yeah, the structure's open. The it's open.
Cool.
Yeah, so
that's really different.
It's very different.
Wow.
And it's not always crowded. You know, you may be the only person going into that particular temple, or you may be going in with your group, or you may be going in with some locals, but it's not overly crowded. There was only one we went to that was really crowded that I'll get to in a minute. But you hear music playing that's mantra music. You know, so the mantra is actually an instrument of the mind to go beyond everyday thought or habitual thinking.
Right.
And it's always on repeat. So, I don't know. Just walking down the street, you might be hearing like some of the little shops playing the Maha Mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra. There was one man that I passed close to the riverside, and he was by himself. And he was mumbling, rum, 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 rum. It's his word for God. And that's all he was saying. Rum, 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 just constantly.
It's so sad to me that we can't walk around saying that out loud without being deemed as, without being judged.
Yeah.
Like, I would love... there's some days where I do start the day off with an hour-long meditation. And I would like to just continue that throughout the day and walk around and be like, God. Divine presence be with me,
I was overwhelmed with emotion sitting for the first ceremony at the Ganges River, because it just hit me. I think the power and the potency of the place and its history and all the visitations and why we were there and what we were doing. And I just cried, happy tears.
Yeah.
And then, every day was a little bit different. Some days we actually left Rishikesh and went up into the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. One day we did the ashram for the Beatles, which is in complete disarray. It's very disheveled.
To the Beatles?
Well, it's called the Beatles ashram because the Beatles actually discovered transcendental meditation in 1967 or 68.
Oh my gosh, I knew that.
The Maharishi was traveling around in England, and it was actually George Harrison's wife who went to this meeting, and then she took George Harrison, and of course he shared it with the rest of the Beatles, and then they became interested and went to Rishikesh to live for a while, and they wanted to get away from the Beatlemania. They wanted to get away from all the things, and they had decided they weren't going to do drugs, that they wanted to clean up, and they wanted to go to India, and they wanted to experience this, and they did at this ashram. And so a couple of them only stayed for I think Ringo only stayed for a week. Paul McCartney stayed a little bit longer. It was really John Lennon and George Harrison that got super inundated in it and stayed for about 2 months.
Wow.
And I think a lot of us Westerners actually owe it to the Beatles for bringing this concept of yoga and meditation out to the masses.
Wow. Yeah.
Because they were so huge in the 60s, and then that's how yoga started kind of building through the hippie or movement here in the States.
They really brought a lot of awareness into the world.
They really did. And if you look at how John Lennon and George Harrison changed their lives at that point.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can see the impact that India and the teachings had upon them and how they wanted to present it. I mean,
that's huge.
It is huge. So it was a little bit of a nostalgia kind of to go there and to be in that space. And there was one point in one of the buildings where it has the Beatles painted on both sides. And of course, everybody's wanting to get their pictures made in there. And these locals had come in. And I don't know how we started interacting together, but we started chanting together and laughing together. And we had our pictures made with them. And we had the best time at the Beatles ashram.
Can I just say, truly, the Beatles would have wanted that experience for you to happen versus coming to celebrate them.
Right.
Right? I mean, again, we get back to that, like, being in the moment, in the now moment, feeling the energy of what's here versus, oh, they were here. That doesn't make it sacred necessarily.
Yes. It was that connective piece that I felt like was really important.
Right.
And monkeys are everywhere. It's like birds and squirrels here. Where you see birds and squirrels, monkeys literally everywhere there. So there was monkeys all through the ashram. And but anyway, one thing that I'll say about the locals and some of the Indians who were pilgrimages there, they all wanted their picture taken with us. Because fair skin, red hair, we had some fair skin, blonde hair, and it's just so different that they're like, ooh, take a picture with me. So we're probably on a lot of Instagrams that we don't know.
Robbie's going viral in India.
But it was a lot of fun. But something that I was telling you about earlier, there were so many just random conversations I got into with locals that were so hospitable and nice and wanting to know who we were and why we were there, and we would sing and they would teach us dances, but some of them would end the conversation with, we are one. All are one.
Some, I thought you said all of them.
Not all of them, some of them. Some of them would end the conversation that way.
That's
which
beautiful.
I loved. And I was like, yes, we are all one.
Right, because you were celebrating being with each other.
Yes. It was beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
We
celebrated Diwali, which is their festival of lights.
I can't believe you were there for that.
It was awesome. They celebrate with sweets and treats and candles and sand art and fireworks. It's kind of like their New Year's in a way. But really what they're doing is they're inviting Lakshmi into their home. And Lakshmi is the goddess of prosperity and abundance.
Okay.
So they're inviting her into their home for the next year, which is, what a beautiful practice.
Yeah.
One of the days we went to, this was really, really powerful. On the day of the Beatles ashram, we were having breakfast, and some of the people in our group, because it was kind of a free day, they wanted to do a spa treatment. And this gentleman that went with us, he was a really devout Catholic. And he said, I found a Catholic church that I really want to go visit. And he goes, what fascinates me about this church is, instead of it having a crucifix, it has Jesus coming out of the Ganges River.
Oh, fine.
And I was like, I'm going with you.
That's
so there were a few of
beautiful.
us that went to this Catholic church. And what was so fascinating about it was so inclusive and so welcoming. It had signs all up around kind of the upper border of the yin yang symbol, of the Om symbol, of these different various symbols from different cultures. that symbols that mean something very positive and spiritual were also included in the church. Instead of a pipe organ, it had a harmonium and tabla drums.
I have to say that I love how Catholicism shows up differently in different regions of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It truly does. I saw that in Peru and Bolivia, and I love that you can see
I
their
love that
version.
they had Jesus coming out of the Ganges River because the Ganga is considered the Holy Mother. And people go on pilgrimage to the Ganges River to take a dip in the water. It's like a baptism.
Yeah.
Because it's about forgiveness and cleansing and purification. And they had Jesus coming out of the Ganges River.
I love it.
But also because I believe that Jesus went and stayed and studied with the rishis and the sages in Rishikesh around this area because there was a Jesus cave. So the next day, we went upstream and up the mountainside to the Ganges River. It was perfect because nobody was there.
Yeah.
And the water was cleaner. But there was a sage, Vasisti, who had a cave where he lived and where he meditated. And we were able to go sit in this cave. And when we went to sit and meditate in the cave, but I got meditative enough to notice... You know how when you start to meditate, your body gets still, your heart slows, and even your breath can slow. And all of that happened. But then sitting in there, I noticed, not my heart. My heart didn't slow. It was strong pulsation. And I don't even know if it was my heartbeat necessarily. It felt energetic. It felt like an energetic pulse. Like,
that's cool.
So it felt very devotional and heart-centered. And that was beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. But even more beautiful than that, when we went upstream a little ways, there was a second cave. And I forgot what the cave is called, but it's dedicated to that sage's wife. It's supposed to be where she meditated. But that's the Jesus cave.
Oh.
And I had... learned about the Jesus cave, and I had a picture of the Jesus cave, and I kept telling our guide, we're going to the Jesus cave. You have to take us to the Jesus cave. And he figured out it was the same one. But I didn't know if I could trust that because he was a little unsure. So I made sure I had my photograph of the Jesus cave, and I was comparing it, and sure enough, it was the same cave.
Okay.
And we went up to this cave. And when I sat to meditate there, it didn't take long at all for me to get into meditation. And what came over me was this extreme amount of unconditional love. And then I thought to invite the Christ energy in. As soon as I invited the Christ energy in, and then sitting in that space and getting that double dose, I started getting all of these little fragments of biblical stories of where Jesus showed acceptance, tolerance, forgiveness, love, compassion, and how misconstrued it's become and tainted the message has become. And so my tears started as overwhelming love, and then the tears turned into, look what it's become. It's been polluted. And then the tears came back because the overwhelming love was just it just overrode all of that.
Do you think what was happening though was that you were healing that inside of yourself? Because you've had
very well
such
could be
religious programming from childhood. I wonder if you could really feel the real version of Christ. So the other version showed itself, how it's just off just a little, but it's really not.
Yeah. I had a realization that even though I rejected the church, I never rejected Jesus or the teachings.
Right.
Never rejected that.
Well, and it's not, it's beautiful. And to accept all those people that come in such deep love and compassion for others.
Well, it also made me realize the connection between Christianity and Hinduism.
Yeah, it's strong.
It made me realize that these stories of Jesus being in India are real.
Yeah.
I've known that. I've trusted that. But to be sitting in that space and to feel what I felt, it was like, this is the missing piece that Christians today don't have. And if they could be directed back to that point in history and what he learned from being in that land and being with these people, that it would bridge the two together so well.
Yeah. There's a book that kind of helps that, The Living Buddha and Living Christ.
Yeah.
There's another book, Jesus in India, I think it's
There's
called.
I know there's one called The Lost Years of Jesus that talk about him traveling and going to India.
That's another one. But I think the point is you really felt.
I really felt it, and it made so much sense.
Yeah.
And there was another place where I really felt connected too. It was up in the mountains going to a Shiva temple. And we went to this Shiva temple, and this is where there were tons and tons and tons of people, because it's considered a holy site. And the holy site is dedicated to where there's a story that goes when the gods and the demons were working together to churn the ocean to pull up the elixir of life, or the fountain of youth, or the drink of immortality, that the demons were really trying to get it. And the gods were only helping the demons because the gods wanted to trick the demons so that the demons could not have the drink of immortality.
Oh.
And so the story goes, they were turning and turning and working together. And then this wishing cow comes up, Nandi, which is the vehicle for Shiva. And then Lakshmi, the goddess of beauty and prosperity, comes out of the water. And then there's poison before the elixir comes out. Poison comes out that could have killed all of humanity. But Shiva realizes it and takes the drink, and it turns him blue from drinking the poison. And he does it at this temple site and takes rest to recover at this temple site. So I wanted to be at this temple so bad because of the story behind it.
Right.
And
that's a beautiful story.
And of course everybody was going to this temple because it's where Shiva saved humanity. Like, right? I say people from everywhere. People from all over India are there. And you can see some emotion from people being here because maybe they've waited their whole life to be there. Or maybe they're feeling the power of the place. And we get there, we shed our shoes, and we get an offering, and we start to stand in line. And I asked the guide, I was like, do you bring a lot of groups up here? And he was like, I come up here, but I usually suggest not to come here. And I'm like, really? Why? And he said, because of the crowds, because it's so crowded. He was like, where we're standing in line, it's going to take us about an hour. And I said, you know what? I don't mind waiting an hour because I know the story behind the temple and I really connect to Shiva and I really want to be here. And thank you so much for agreeing to bring us here. I started singing Om Namah Shivaya for like 10 or 12 minutes and it just wouldn't stop. Like once I started singing the mantra, I couldn't stop it.
What does that mantra mean?
Om Namah Shivaya is the dedication to Shiva. This is not the literal translation, but the benefit of using that mantra is to help you to overcome ignorance, to break through the veils of illusion, to stomp out negative energy, to clear yourself, to clear your surroundings, to control your senses. So there's a lot of good benefit that can come from it.
Can we do that together here?
Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, 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 Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Yeah, that was powerful. But another one that was really powerful was the next day we went to the Devi temple. Devi means goddess.
Okay.
And so I wanted us to go to a goddess temple because we're always talking about the divine feminine and the divine feminine waking up. But it was dedicated to Durga. And Durga is one of the incarnations of one of Shiva's wives. Now, Shiva's first wife, and again, there's different incarnations of this, but Sati was the first wife, and the story goes that her father wasn't really proud of her marriage to Shiva. Yeah. In fact, they had gone into penance when they were trying to have a child because they weren't having any luck having a child. And so they really wanted to have this child, and they went to a particular goddess and wanted her to be born. And the deal was, if she was born to them, then they would, I can't remember exactly how the story goes, but I think they would always have to support her in her decisions. And then when she got old enough to marry, she wanted to marry Shiva. So she started paying all this penance and started doing these rituals to Shiva, saying, I want to be your wife. And when Shiva agreed to this, the parents didn't care for Shiva. They didn't really like Shiva. But they knew the deal, they knew the vow, and so they had to allow her to marry him. Well, you know, Shiva can be a little bit of a Rastafarian in a way. He had long hair, kind of dreadlocky, and he would often wear ashes because he hung out with ghosts. And and he's the ruler of time, and he's about transformation, and he rules over the birth, life, death, rebirth process. The story goes that the father wanted to create this big ceremony, and he was having this kind of party and ritual with this fire, and he did not invite his daughter because they were embarrassed of Shiva and they didn't want Shiva to be there. But word got back to the daughter, Sati, and she showed up at the party, really upset with her parents, and actually threw herself into the fire as a sacrifice.
Oh, well, that was a turning of events.
Yeah, so Shiva gets word of this, and he is grief-stricken and upset, as any person would be if they had discovered their spouse had done this. He shows up, takes the remainder of her body out of the fire, but she's gone at this point. And there's more to the story, but basically what I'm going to switch to is he starts doing the dance. Shiva's considered the Lord of Dance, so he can dance the dance for creation.
Oh, wow.
He can also dance the dance of destruction. And he started dancing in the destructive mode. So the other gods were looking on and were afraid of complete dissolution, complete destruction. And so they were like, we've got to take Shiva out of his grief, because he was dancing and carrying his wife on his shoulders. And I think it was Vishnu, I can't remember exactly, but one of the gods said, the only way we're gonna break this spell that he's under, and this is harsh, but we're gonna dismember her body and scatter it so that he can't carry her, and that will help him to stop the dance. So this particular temple we went to, was about there's 52 temples that are dedicated to the story. Okay. There's 52 Devi temples dedicated to the story of where different parts evidently fell to the earth. And the one we went to was her chest.
Her heart.
And yes, I was telling everybody on the trip, I'm most excited about this one out of all the 52 that we could go to, because it contained her heart. And her heart belonged to Shiva. Anyway, so it was beautiful. We hiked up this mountain to get there. The scenery was, oh my goodness, breathtaking. Layers and layers of the Himalayan mountains, even the snow-capped mountains far away. Our guide was telling us China's this way, Nepal is this way. And anyway, it was breathtaking. And that was another place. I got overwhelmed, and I cried a lot. But I was telling you, and I'll go ahead and say this, one thing that I changed that I thought was interesting, and I had not premeditated this at all. Usually when you make some sort of offering or you go into a temple, like if you go into the temple here in Nashville, it's dedicated to Ganesha, and his vehicle is a mouse. And so you can whisper your wish or your wand into the mouse's ear. And at the Shiva temple, you can do that with the cow that's there.
Okay.
And then also with the river, when you're making an offering or making the wish. And it started at the river and it carried throughout the week, and wishing for awakening and remembering, awakening and remembering, awakening and remembering. Coming back home, I wasn't expecting culture shock. And I was not, I mean, usually you get culture shock if you've been somewhere for months, or years. I came back with culture shock after being gone 10 days. And I didn't.
You were sad.
I was sad.
Oh, she loved it so much.
I could cry now.
So hard to be home.
I was sad. I was depressed, actually, for a few days. And Rob was like, "What is wrong? Aren't you glad to be home?" And I'm like, that felt like home.
I think in your soul it is home. I don't necessarily think it was India as much as it was the celebration of being connected all the time and being and feeling the divine and having it be everywhere. I mean, at the end of the day, that's who you are. You celebrate the divine. You're very devoted to being connected inward, and love and joy and non-judgment and compassion.
I just realized how disconnected our culture is.
Our culture is.
Despite the churches on every corner, we're so disconnected.
Yeah. I think recognizing that you were in a place that felt like home is really significant. That spirituality was celebrated and honored and not weird.
Yeah. It was fantastic. So if you ever want a spiritual experience, go to Rishikesh.
India, yeah. And take Robbie.
Take me with you. I'll be your guide. You're welcome. Namaste.
Which they said everywhere.
Which they said everywhere, including the beginning and end of every yoga class.